So let's finish up this chapter, difficult chapter, acquaintance and description. It's difficult in itself, that is the concepts here to try to grasp, and it's also made a little bit more difficult by perhaps some confusions in Russell's presentation. But let's try to get the big picture here. What is he doing? Let me direct you towards something he says towards the beginning of the chapter, after he's mentioned that he believes, at least, that we have direct acquaintance with concepts, universals, abstract ideas. He says, we have therefore to consider acquaintance with other things besides sense data if we are to obtain any tolerably adequate analysis of our knowledge. Analysis of our knowledge. Well, that's an important term there. What are we doing when we analyze something? We're breaking it down into its parts in order to better understand it. That is, we're taking an existing thing and we are analyzing it. And the existing thing here is our knowledge. You might say, well, that's putting the cart before the horse, Russell. I mean, weren't you going to establish or look into the question of whether we really know anything at all? That seemed to be the outlook at the beginning of this book in the opening chapters, whether we can really know anything. Those are the kind of questions that Russell was asking, for instance, in the first chapter, which is a great opening chapter. But here the outlook seems to have changed. That is, he is assuming that we do know, that there is something called human knowledge. And he's not trying to establish that we can know anything beyond our sense data, beyond the things with which we are immediately in contact with in this indubitable, undoubtable way. But rather he's assuming that we have knowledge beyond that, and he's describing it, or he's trying to account for how we do, but sort of assuming that we do. I think this goes back to what he said in earlier chapters again about our primitive belief in the existence of an external world. That is, we have these very basic root commitments to the idea that there is an external world and that we can talk about it, that we can know it. And Russell is going with that primitive belief, that primitive intuition, one might say, and rather than trying to establish beyond a shadow of a doubt, which he really says we can't, that we know an external world. He's sort of assuming that we do, that our knowledge extends beyond our immediate acquaintance with our own sense data and extends to the world around us, the universe, the things that are external to us. So any adequate analysis of our knowledge would account for how we actually do that. And that is really, I think, what he's doing with the whole idea of knowledge by description. How do we know things beyond our immediate acquaintance? Well, we do so through descriptions, through the basic form of the so-and-so. The thing in the world which has a certain property, and although we are not immediately acquainted with that thing in the world, we can know truths about that thing in the world by ascribing properties to it. And one thing I would like to say, and I think that Russell would agree with me, is that whenever I do know something or seem to myself to know something by description, I could be wrong. Let's go back to the things I said about Obama, that he was born in the state of Hawaii, that he's president of the United States, that he was a law professor at the University of Chicago. Those are all descriptions of Barack Obama. Every one of them could be wrong. That is, it's possible. When I make those claims, it's possible that any individual claim could actually be wrong. Why? Because all of them involve a judgment. A judgment. My experiencing of my own sense data, let's just say if I'm looking at an apple and I say to myself, well, right now I have a sensation of red, That is not a judgment, I think. That is merely a description of the appearance. It's not a judgment as to the truth of some way the world is. But if I say I am looking at an apple, I have made a judgment. That is, I have made a certain assertion about the way that the universe is. And if I make a judgment about the way the universe is, in any with regard to any particular in the universe, I could be wrong. That is, I can not doubt that I am having a sensation of redness when I look at the apple. That is my knowledge by acquaintance. That's something of which I'm immediately acquainted with, and therefore is absolutely sure of. But if I say that I am looking at an apple, I've made a certain claim about the way the world is, and it's quite possible, although unlikely, that I'm not looking at an apple. I'm looking at something else. I have made a judgment on the basis of my sense data that I am looking at an apple, but I could be wrong. However crazy or unlikely that may sound, in any particular case I could be wrong, because any of my judgments about particulars could be wrong. So I think what Russell is saying, I would interpret the whole notion of knowledge by description as Russell sort of assuming that through language, through thinking and making propositions about the world, that we can articulate truths about things in the world. That this is really the structure of language, or at least a large part of language, that it can describe a world. That we can do this, and that we do this. However, in any particular case, I could be wrong, and I think Russell would be forced to agree with me. That is, when I make any judgment about a particular, even something that seems so absolutely sort of obvious, that Obama is president, I could be wrong. And I guess that goes to any empirical proposition, any proposition, any statement about the way that the world is. So this adequate analysis of our knowledge for Russell would have to include knowledge of things that we are not directly acquainted with, because the things with which we are directly acquainted are a pretty narrow range of things. He says at the very end of this chapter, the chief importance of knowledge by description is that it enables us to pass beyond the limits of our private experience. In spite of the fact that we can only know truths which are wholly composed of terms which we have experienced in acquaintance, we can yet have knowledge by description of things which we have never experienced. In view of the very narrow range of our immediate experience, this result is vital. So it's really a necessary step for the adequate analysis of knowledge that we say that we are able to know things with which we are not in immediate contact with. That would be the limits of our private experience that Russell refers to there. Private experience being experience of sense data, and also importantly experience or acquaintance with certain universals that we employ in the statements or propositions that we make about the world. And that needs I'm afraid I can do one more video. That needs some elucidation. When he refers to the terms which we have experienced in acquaintance, that is, all of our knowledge of truths, or all of our knowledge by description, ultimately depends upon knowledge by acquaintance, and that is, I guess, why we would call Russell an empiricist, and that needs a little bit of explanation, I'm afraid.